The question you've been set asks you to evaluate. In order to understand how to do that, let us take you back to a question you may have been asked in kindergarten. You'd have been given a pattern, such as a square, a triangle, and a circle, and asked, based on what you know, what would logically be next. And obviously, the answer would be a square. What we've done is you've produced a logical conclusion or derived an opinion based on what you already know. In the senior years of high school, we essentially are asking you the same thing. But instead of teaching you shapes, we teach you other things. So instead of saying a square, we might teach you poetry by John Donne. Instead of a triangle, we might teach a Shakespearean play. Instead of a circle, it might be a speech by Socrates. And then we ask you, what does all of this tell us about the concept of love? In legal studies, we may look at the issue of same-sex marriage, then the issue of laws relating to adoption, and finally laws relating to the care and protection of children, and then ask you, is the law effective at regulating families? In the geography realm, we may teach you that sea bees are a form for managing the coastline, as is beach nourishment, as is purchasing property, but then ask you which option is best for managing beaches and keeping people happy. Essentially, this is all about thinking, and the Board of Studies is going to ask you to learn a whole variety of content, but then get you to produce logical conclusions and thoughts based on that content. The board will in fact get you to think in different ways, and refer to this as command terminology. All of your essays will start with a different command terminology telling you the type of thinking the board wants you to do. This could include analyze, assess, critically evaluate, examine, investigate, justify, synthesize. In fact, there are 35 different ways that the board can ask you to think. You can look all these up by Googling command terminology Board of Studies. But one of the most important that you'll ever encounter is evaluate. And that's what we hope to explain is today. Evaluation, according to the Board of Studies, and this is a direct quote from their website, requires a student to make a judgment based on a criteria, determine the value of. The two terms in here that are important is judgment based on a criteria. Very simply, a judgment is simply your opinion. We're asking for your opinion on the content that you have learned. However, a criteria is slightly more difficult. In order to explore this, I'm going to use the example of two pens, which I'll creatively refer to as pen 1 and pen 2. My opinion, very simply, could be that pen 1 is the best pen. The problem with my opinion is it is exactly that. There is no proof. Nothing makes me special or particularly gifted at determining what pen is better than the other one. Why should I be believed? But this is where we can use a criteria to make our judgment or our opinion more substantial. The criteria works like this. We take both our pens and we decide a set of criteria for ranking them. So we can decide that we can compare pens based on their grip. We can compare pens based on how smooth they are to write. We can compare pens based on their color of ink. We can also compare pens on their overall style. Now we have our criteria, we can go through and evaluate them or produce a judgment. So the grip on pen 1 is very good, whereas the grip on pen 2 is non-existent. To write with, pen 1 unfortunately is not particularly smooth, but pen 2 however is particularly smooth. The color ink from pen 1 is excellent, whereas the color ink from pen 2 is not as good. The style of pen 1 is much better, whereas the style of pen 2 is much worse. Here, my opinion can be given again. Pen 1 is the best. And here I can prove to you why that is the case. Based on my criteria, I can clearly conclude and logically and reasonably conclude that pen 1 is best. In the question you've been set, evaluate the implications for social justice in relation to Australia's military, trade or migration treaties with one other, there's a mistake here, with one other country in the Southeast Asian region in terms of its impact on human rights. We're asking you to simply complete the pattern again. The square in this case would be military agreements. the triangle, migration agreements, the circle, trade agreements. This will have been taught to you in class. But what we're asking for is, based on this, we want a logical conclusion. We want you to tell us what impacts do these agreements have in terms of its impact of human rights. In fact, human rights in this instance is the criteria. So the thing that this paper is asking for is your opinion on Australia's Southeast Asian Agreement based on the criteria of its impact on human rights. Are these agreements useful or good for helping, or are they bad because they destroy people's human rights? And based on this, you can tell us whether or not our agreements are a good thing or whether or not our agreements are a bad thing. And that is all that you're going to need to do for this assignment.